Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys making some time to spend with me today and watch the video. Really appreciate that. And guys, today I sort of want to have a debate and sort of a discussion. Want to get your guys' feedback on this as well. Would bass fishing be better off without tournament fishing? If bass fishing tournaments didn't exist, what would our sport look like? Sort of wanted to dive into that in a pretty deep analysis of this, because we've touched upon it a little bit in the past, but I've had a lot of comments. I mean, a lot of comments over the past 6 months, because, we talk a lot about the sport on the channel here. And so many people out there, I get comments saying that, tournament fishing is the worst thing that ever happened to bass fishing. I mean, a lot of them, guys. So I think it's a topic worth discussing. So I'm going to give you guys my opinion in today's edition here. Also, guys, quick reminder, you may have heard me talking about it, but I have a new page on Tackle Warehouse called Blaukat's Corner. And every month I go in there, and on Blaukat's Corner, I list my top baits of the month and put a correlating video talking about each lure. And we just got our October picks up there. So if you guys are interested in checking it out, I'll put my Blaukat's Corner Tackle Warehouse link in the description of the video. You guys can watch the videos there and see what my recommendations for the month are. So I really appreciate that. Okay, guys, here is my opinion on it. Bass tournaments, because I think I'm qualified to talk about this, since I've been fishing professionally for almost 40 years and fishing tournaments since the late 70s. I've been there, done that. The answer is, if bass fishing would be better off without tournaments, the answer is yes and no. Yes and no both. And I want to get into that a little bit. First of all, before I get into it, I'm going to say right off the bat, yes, bass fishing would be better without any tournaments at all in it. But there are some disclaimers to that. So I want to get into sort of the both, why it's a positive, why it's a negative. So let's first of all talk about why it's a negative, why bass fishing would be better without tournaments. Tournaments put a tremendous amount of pressure on the fish. And it's not like it was, because when I started fishing tournaments, guys, back in the late 70s and early 80s, I'm talking a tiny fraction of the tournaments. Most of the tournaments back then, you had club tournaments, or like the Buddy Bass tournaments, where you'd have every Saturday, there'd be, 75 boats or so in some Buddy benefit tournament. And then you had the Bassmaster tournaments, which wasn't that big of a deal back then, because there was only 6 tournaments a year. And then you had some smaller circuits like Western Bass and, some secondary circuits. But anyway, it was just, I'm going to guess it was probably 90% fewer tournaments back in the 80s and late 70s than they are now. So we've had a massive increase in the number of tournaments. Not only tournaments from the club levels and the buddy tournaments, you have the big bass tournaments, those big bass bashes. You have high school and college tournaments that are gigantic. You have, weekend circuits. You have AAA circuits. You got Pro-Am series tournaments regionally. Every state has a plethora of different type of tournaments. There's just thousands and thousands of tournaments. So from that standpoint, the high level fishing pressure, now this is not like weekend fishing pressure. When you're talking about tournament pressure, you're talking about highly skilled anglers with the best equipment that pressure the fish on a level like they've never seen before. And from that standpoint, not only does it educate the fish more, it makes them more difficult to catch, it makes them more finicky, it makes them more aware, but there's a tremendous amount of mortality from tournaments. Not only do tournaments obviously kill fish, like when people haul them around in a well all day long and they lose their scales, or their gut hooked, or something happens, some type of trauma issues, barotrauma from all the spotlighting, which is a huge problem now. There's a lot of delayed mortality after the tournaments. Don't believe the tournament live release rates. You see these tournaments say, oh, we had a 98%, live release rate in this tournament. That's a bunch of BS, because probably half of those fish are going to die from delayed mortality. Or when they call a fish alive at a weigh-in site, it may have a fin moving, but that fish isn't ever going to make it. So there's a ton of fish that get killed in bass tournaments, for sure. So you got this combination of the mortality rates that are created by bass tournaments, But just as important to that, it makes the fish more difficult to catch, simply because they're more educated, they're more pressure, and there's less of them. People say that, okay, Randy, there's more fish now than there's ever been, or this and that. There's not, guys. There's fewer fish in our lakes than there's ever been before, but there's an illusion created that we have good fishing in our lakes because technology creates this illusion of better fishing because there's no place for the fish to hide. We've had evolutions in rod and reel technology, lure technology, and now with the spotlighting and the cheater box, there's nowhere for those fish to hide. So people equate these catch rates in tournaments and say, look, our fishing's great. We're still catching a lot of fish. That's because you have the technology that creates this artificial illusion. If you took the technology that was present back in 1980 and you instituted it in 2024, and you say to these guys in tournaments, okay, you can only use, a flasher. You got a 6-foot fiberglass rod. You got monofilament line. You got a boat that's got an 85 horsepower motor on it. You got a trolling motor that has 40 pounds of thrust. And you got a black rubber jig with a pork frog, and you got a Colorado bladed spinnerbait and maybe a couple crankbaits. Go out and see how many fish you're going to catch. If we had to fish with the technology in 2024 that we used in 1980, the catch rates would be pathetic in these tournaments. So this technological advancement has created this illusion of better fishing, despite the fact our fisheries are overfished. There's fewer fish now than ever has been before, and all the things that go along with that. So from that standpoint, tournament fishing has been devastating to the sport. There's been nothing good about it whatsoever. Another thing with tournaments, I'll say one thing before I get into the other aspect about the positive things tournaments done, is that tournament organizations have made a huge mistake in their scheduling, because they put tournaments at certain times of the year that have no business being there. Now let's go through that a little bit, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. There is no reason whatsoever that any tournament should be scheduled in and around a major period of the spawning time of year. Now, I know these fish spawn over a course of several months in most lakes, but there are prime windows. There's like a 3-week window when you can pretty much predict when most of these fish are going to spawn. Like, for example, in Florida and Texas and some of the southern tier states, you're going to have a lot of fish spawning in that February, March time frame. If you're in the mid part of the country, like where I live in Missouri, you're going to have a lot of fish spawning anywhere between that first to third week of April. And then if you're up north, you're going to have a lot of fish spawning in May and early June. So even though that you can't specifically say when every fish is going to spawn, there's a good idea when most of those fish spawn, and simply don't have any tournaments. For example, don't allow these people to schedule bass tournaments in the state of Missouri in April. Don't allow people to schedule bass tournaments in the state of Texas in March. Don't allow people to schedule bass tournaments up on Lake Champlain or somewhere in the month of May. Let these fish spawn. Let them spawn undisturbed. It'd be sort of like having hunting season, right when, the babies are being born, like in the springtime of the year when all these fawns are being born. It's like, let's have the hunting season for does then. That's the stupidity of putting bass tournaments in and around the spawn. So that's the first thing. The second thing to do is stop having tournaments in the summertime of the year. Summertime of the year with the hot water, oxygen level problems, you're just asking for a fish kill. So if these tournaments would stop being held during the spawn and during the summer, and hold these tournaments when the water's cool, hold them in late fall, the winter time, very, very early spring, when the water temperatures are in the 40s and the 50s, that's going to be a positive with that. You're going to have a lot less fish killed from that standpoint. So let's talk about, the positive things about tournament fishing. Probably the biggest positive that tournament fishing has ever brought into the sport is the awareness of conservation issues. When Bassmaster first instituted some of their catch and release policies back in the 70s, that was a groundbreaking thing, because people back then, they didn't know what catch and release was. People, when you went fishing, you didn't go fishing for fun. You went fishing to keep and eat fish. And Bassmaster coming out with the catch and release programs return, to be caught again another day. That has continued over the decades, and that's made a huge inroad in conservation efforts in this country. It's brought an awareness to that. So that's probably the best thing that tournaments have done. Another good thing tournaments have probably done is they've been innovators. They've been equipment innovation innovators. We've got better equipment. We got better rods and reels. We got better boats. Most of that stuff is a direct influence from tournament fishing, that need to improve, the competitive edge people have. Now that's sort of a double-edged sword, because, we've talked about this a lot on the channels. Once you get to a certain point, you sort of break tradition and you break heritage a little bit. So those equipment innovations, they've got to be really very careful on when they're allowed and when they're not allowed. Now, I don't have any problems. Like if somebody that makes a crankbait or a jerkbait, if they come out with a better color, or if they come out with a lure that, got more action to it or something like that, or a better hook, that's a positive innovation. There's not anything wrong with that. But when you start stepping across the line into stuff like electronic technology that allows you to, see fish in real time and not be able and find fish where you didn't ever know they were before, then you're sort of crossing the line. And at that point, it becomes a negative, and it's no longer a positive with equipment innovations. Overall, guys, when you look at it and say, tournaments, they've been a bad thing or a good thing for the sport? Are they a good thing or are they a bad thing? As a tournament angler, somebody that's made their living as a tournament angler, if you had to say yes or no and not waffle back and forth of either one, I'm going to say no, they haven't been good for the sport. When you're talking about people going out just to catch fish, to have a good time and to maximize the number of fish that you catch, the size of the fish that you catch, overall tournaments have been a negative. They've played a negative role in that, in terms of making fishing tougher, reducing the size of the larger fish, making fish more educated, more aware, putting more pressure on the water. All those factors come together to make fishing tougher in general, because my definition or my judgment on a fishery, it doesn't have anything to do if you look at a tournament where a lake, if you go to one lake and look at a tournament result, I don't care anything about the top 25%. If somebody won a tournament with 100 pounds over a course of 4 days, that didn't mean nothing to me. What I look at is what is the bottom 1/3 of the standings. If there's 100 people in the tournament, I want to know what 95th, 90th place, 80th place. I want to know what those weights are, because that's more indicative to the normal fishing population. The normal bass angler, the everyday weekend recreational bass angler, they're going to be more in line with that bottom weight. So when you look at the quality of a fishery and how good a bass fishery is, never pay any attention to the top level. Pay attention to the bottom of the scale there, because as tournament anglers simply know more. They got better equipment. They spend more time at it, and that's going to be a better gauge on the quality of fishing in that particular lake. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about it. The tournaments suck. They need to get rid of them. It's been a good thing. Let me know what y'all think. Be curious, and talk later.